The rejection ceremony was supposed to destroy her, and as Mireia stood before the entire pack of Greymarch, the mate bond burning like poison in her chest, she knew what was coming. The Alpha King would speak the sacred words of severance. He would cut her loose before 1,000 witnesses. He would humiliate the bastard daughter of a disgraced bloodline and send her back to the shadows where she belonged. So the crowd waited for her to crumble. They waited for tears, for begging, for the pitiful collapse of a woman whose one chance at belonging had just been ripped away. Her father stood near the front, his expression carved from satisfaction. Her sister Cressida smiled behind her hand, barely concealing her triumph. But when Alpha King Corvain spoke the final word of rejection, something unexpected happened. Mireia smiled. Not a broken smile, not a mask of dignity, a real smile, wide and terrible and free. As if she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. Then the shadows moved. They poured from her skin like living darkness, swirling around her body in ribbons of pure night. The torches flickered and died. The great hall plunged into blackness, and in that blackness, only Mireia remained visible, her eyes glowing with ancient power that hadn't been seen in Greymarch for 300 years. The prophecy had warned that she would either save the Alpha King or destroy him. Neither of them understood that both outcomes were possible. Neither of them understood that love would decide which one came true. The great hall of Greymarch had never held so many wolves. They packed the stone galleries 3 rows deep, their formal attire a sea of blacks and silvers, the colors of the kingdom. Torches blazed along every pillar, casting dancing light across tapestries that depicted 3 centuries of Alpha Kings. And at the center of it all, raised on a platform of polished obsidian, stood the mating altar. This was where bonds were sealed, where Alpha claimed Luna and 2 souls became one. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose entirely. Mireia stood at the base of the altar steps, her hands clasped before her, her heart slamming against her ribs with such force she was certain the wolves closest to her could hear it. She wore white, because tradition demanded it. The gown was borrowed, slightly too large, hastily altered by servants who'd whispered about her the entire time they worked. The bastard daughter. The stain on the Blackthorn name. The girl whose mother had been executed for practicing forbidden shadow magic 20 years ago. And now, impossibly, catastrophically, she'd been identified as the Alpha King's fated mate. The bond had awakened 3 days prior. Mireia had felt it snap into place like a hook through her heart, painful and undeniable. She'd been in the market square, purchasing bread with the meager coins her father allowed her, when the Alpha King's procession had passed. Their eyes had met for exactly 1 heartbeat. 1 heartbeat. And everything had changed. The King's advisors had confirmed it within hours. The sacred tests had been performed. The bond was genuine, unbreakable by any natural means. Mireia Blackthorn, the unwanted daughter of a minor lord, was destined to become Luna of Greymarch. She'd allowed herself to hope. For 3 impossible days she'd imagined a different life. A life where she mattered. A life where she wasn't hidden away like a shameful secret. A life where someone might actually want her. But then the seer had come. Mireia didn't know what prophecy the old woman had whispered to the king. She only knew that his expression had transformed from confusion to ice, that he'd stopped answering summons, that his advisors had begun looking at her with something far worse than pity. Fear. Now she stood in the great hall, and the crowd's whispers washed over her like waves of poison. Why is she even here? If he's rejecting her, why the ceremony? To make it official, the bond must be severed by sacred right, or it will drive them both mad. Look at her. Does she even know what's about to happen? Of course she knows. Everyone knows. The king requested a public rejection. Maximum witnesses. He wants no question about his choice. Mireia kept her expression smooth, her breathing even. She'd learned long ago how to hide, how to become invisible even when standing in plain sight. It was the only way she'd survived this long. Her father, Lord Malachar Blackthorn, stood in the front row with her half-sister Cressida. He wasn't looking at Mireia. He never looked at her if he could avoid it. But Cressida was staring with barely concealed glee, her perfect lips curved in anticipation of the humiliation to come. It was Cressida who'd brought the seer to the king. Mireia was certain of it. Her sister had spent 23 years being the only daughter who mattered, the only heir worth acknowledging. The idea of Mireia rising above her, becoming Luna, becoming queen. It must have been unbearable. The great doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Silence crashed through the crowd like a physical force. Alpha King Corvain entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the lethal grace that marked his bloodline. His hair was dark as a moonless night, swept back from a face that artists had tried and failed to capture. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of molten silver that seemed to see through everything they touched. He was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, in the way a winter storm was beautiful. Cold and perfect and absolutely merciless, the crowd parted before him. Even the most powerful lords stepped aside, their wolves recognizing the dominance that rolled off him like heat from a forge. This was the Alpha King of Greymarch, ruler of 12 territories, commander of the largest army in the known world. And 3 days ago, the fates had declared Mireia his perfect match. Corvain climbed the altar steps without looking at her. His advisors flanked him, their faces grave. The high priest waited at the top, sacred oil gleaming in a ceremonial bowl. Only when the king reached the altar did he finally turn. Their eyes met. The mate bond screamed to life in Mireia's chest. It was like being struck by lightning, every nerve ending igniting at once. She felt him, felt his presence wrapping around her soul like iron chains. Her wolf, the beast she'd spent her entire life suppressing, surged toward the surface with desperate need. Mate, mate, mate. But Corvain's expression showed nothing. No recognition, no pull, no struggle, just ice. Mireia of House Blackthorn, he said, and his voice carried through the silent hall like the toll of a funeral bell. You have been identified as my fated mate by sacred bond. The crowd held its breath. I reject you. 3 words. 3 simple words, and Mireia felt the bond begin to tear. It was agony unlike anything she'd imagined, like someone reaching into her chest and ripping out pieces of her heart with their bare hands. But she'd been prepared for agony. She'd lived with it her entire life. What she wasn't prepared for was what happened next. I reject the bond that ties your soul to mine, Corvain continued, his voice growing louder, more formal, each word a blade. I reject any claim you hold upon my heart, my throne, my kingdom. I reject you utterly and completely, before these witnesses and before the gods themselves. The high priest raised the ceremonial oil. This was the final step. Once it was poured, the rejection would be sealed. Permanent, irreversible. The crowd began to murmur. Some wolves looked uncomfortable. Others seemed thrilled by the spectacle. In the front row, Cressida was practically vibrating with satisfaction. And Mireia? Mireia felt something shift deep inside her. She'd spent 23 years hiding, suppressing, pretending to be nothing, no one, a shadow of a person who didn't deserve to take up space. She'd watched her mother burn for the crime of possessing power. She'd endured her father's hatred, her sister's cruelty, the pack's disdain. She'd made herself small because small things survived. But now, standing before this cold king who was tearing out her soul without a flicker of remorse, something ancient awakened. Why am I still hiding? She thought. What's left to protect? The high priest began to pour the oil, and Mireia smiled. It rose to her lips unbidden, wide and wild and absolutely genuine, not a mask, not a defense. Pure, terrible freedom. She saw Corvain's eyes widen, saw confusion crack through his icy control. "She's smiling," someone whispered. "Why is she smiling?" The oil splashed onto the altar. The bond shattered, and the shadows came. They erupted from Mireya's skin like living darkness, spiraling outward in ribbons of pure night. Every torch in the great hall flickered, then died. 1,000 wolves cried out as blackness swallowed the room whole, absolute and impenetrable. But Mireya could see perfectly. She could see everything: the terrified faces, the scrambling guards, the wolves falling over themselves to flee. And she could see Corvain, standing frozen at the altar, his silver eyes fixed on her with an expression she'd never expected to see on the Alpha King's face. Fear. "Shadow Wielder!" someone screamed. "She's a Shadow Wielder! Kill her! Kill her!" The darkness pulsed around Mireya like a heartbeat, like wings, like the embrace of something ancient that had been sleeping inside her for 23 years, waiting for this exact moment to wake. She looked at the king who had just rejected her, the king who had humiliated her before his entire kingdom, the king whose prophecy had declared she would either save him or destroy him. And she laughed. Guards rushed toward her through the darkness. Mireya didn't move. She didn't have to. The shadows moved for her. They surged outward like a tide of living night, slamming into the first wave of soldiers with enough force to send them sprawling. Swords clattered against stone. Wolves yelped in shock and pain. More guards came, and more shadows rose to meet them. "Stand down!" Corvain's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. "Stand down!" The guards hesitated. The shadows writhed. And slowly, impossibly, the torches began to flicker back to life. Mireya felt the darkness recede, pulling back into her skin like water draining into sand. She hadn't called it forth, and she couldn't control its retreat. The power moved according to its own ancient logic, responding to something she didn't understand. Within moments, the great hall was illuminated again, though dimmer than before. Half the torches had guttered out entirely, leaving pools of shadow in the corners that seemed deeper than they should be. Every eye was fixed on Mireya. She stood exactly where she'd been standing before, her white gown unstained, and her expression calm. But something had changed. The crowd could feel it. She could feel it. She was no longer hiding. "Seize her!" Lord Malakar's voice rang out. Her father had pushed to the front of the crowd, his face purple with rage. "She's a Shadow Wielder. She carries the same curse as her mother. The law demands her execution." Several guards moved forward, but they moved slowly, their hands trembling on their weapons. They'd just watched this woman stop a dozen of their brothers without lifting a finger. "I said stand down." Corvain descended the altar steps, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. He walked past his advisors, past the high priest, past the ceremonial bowl of oil that still smoked faintly on the altar. He stopped directly in front of Mireya. This close, she could see things she'd missed before. The faint shadows beneath his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. The slight pallor beneath his tan skin. The way his jaw clenched as he looked at her, fighting some internal battle she couldn't name. And his scent. Even with the bond severed, she could still smell him. Winter pine and cold steel and something else. Something wrong. Something that smelled like frost on dead flowers. "You're dying," she said quietly. The words fell from her lips before she could stop them. Some instinct, some knowledge that had risen with the shadows, had seen the truth written in his very essence. Corvain's expression didn't change, but she saw his pupils dilate, saw the barely perceptible hitch in his breathing. "Guards," he said, not looking away from her. "Clear the hall." "Your Majesty," one of his advisors began. "Now." The single word carried enough alpha command to make even the most powerful wolves flinch. Within minutes, the great hall was emptying. Lords and ladies filed out in shocked clusters, whispering frantically. Guards escorted the reluctant, the curious, and the outraged. Lord Malachar tried to stay. "She is my daughter. I have the right to—" "You have no rights here," Corvain said coldly. "You surrendered those rights when you let her mother burn without protest. Get out." Mireia watched her father's face cycle through rage, humiliation, and finally, fear. He left without another word. Cressida followed, shooting Mireia a look of pure venom as she passed. The great doors boomed shut. Silence. Corvain and Mireia stood alone in the vast hall, surrounded by guttering torches and the lingering scent of extinguished flames. "You knew," Mireia said. "You knew I was a shadow wielder. That's why you rejected me." "No." Corvain's voice was flat. "I suspected you might carry your mother's bloodline. That was a concern, not a condemnation. Shadow wielders are rare, but not inherently dangerous." "Then why?" The question tore from her throat before she could cage it. "Why reject me so publicly? Why humiliate me before the entire kingdom?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. He simply looked at her, those silver eyes searching her face as if trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't expected. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a folded parchment. "3 days ago," he said, "a seer came to my court. She claimed to have received a vision of such importance that she'd traveled 200 miles to deliver it personally." He handed Mireia the parchment. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The writing was spidery, cramped, and barely legible. But the words were clear enough. "The shadow-born daughter of the fallen house will stand before the frozen throne. By her hand, the Alpha King shall fall. Or by her hand, be saved. There is no middle path. Choose wrongly, and the kingdom burns." Mireia read it twice, 3 times. Her heart had stopped somewhere around "shall fall." "You rejected me," she said slowly, "because a prophecy said I might destroy you. The prophecy said you would either save me or destroy me." Corvain's jaw tightened. "I chose to remove the possibility of either outcome. If we have no bond, if we have no connection, then the prophecy cannot come to pass." "But the bond is severed now. Shouldn't I be escorted to the border? Executed? Why are we alone?" Corvain's silver eyes dropped to her hands, where faint traces of shadow still curled around her fingers like dark smoke. "Because I didn't expect this," he said quietly. "I didn't expect you to be the last shadow wielder in Greymarch." Mireia stiffened. "The last?" "Your mother's bloodline was ancient. When she was executed, the council believed the gift died with her. Shadow magic requires specific heritage. It cannot be taught or transferred." He took a step closer, and despite herself, Mireia held her ground. "There is a blight spreading through my kingdom," Corvain continued. "A corruption that my soldiers cannot fight because it exists in darkness itself. It swallows villages. It devours livestock. It has killed 300 of my people in the last month alone, and nothing I do stops it." Understanding dawned cold and terrible in Mireia's chest. "You need me." "Yes." The admission seemed to cost him something. She could see it in the tightening of his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides. "So here is my offer," he said. "I cannot restore the mate bond. What is severed by sacred right cannot be reformed. But I can offer you something else. A political marriage, an alliance." Mireia's breath caught. "You would marry me," she said carefully, "but not as your mate." "Correct. You would have the title of queen. You would have protection, resources, status. Your family could never touch you again. In exchange, you would use your power to help me fight the blight that is consuming my kingdom." "And the prophecy? The part about me destroying you?" Something flickered in Corvain's eyes, something that looked almost like pain. "We would maintain separate lives, separate chambers. We would appear together only when absolutely necessary. The bond is already severed. If we keep our distance, if we never allow any true connection to form, then neither outcome of the prophecy can manifest. Because you'll never let yourself care about me, Mireia said, and I'll never have the chance to care about you. Precisely. She should refuse. Everything in her screamed that this was a trap, a cage dressed in silk and titles. He'd rejected her publicly. He'd humiliated her. He'd made it clear that she was nothing more than a tool to be used. But then she thought about what waited for her outside this hall. Her father, already planning her execution. Her sister, eager to watch her burn as their mother had. A kingdom full of wolves who had just witnessed her forbidden power and would never let her live in peace. Cold over cruelty, she thought grimly. I'll choose cold over cruelty every time. I have conditions, Mireia said. Corvain's eyebrow rose slightly. You're in no position to negotiate. I am the last shadow wielder in your kingdom. You just admitted you need me. I'd say that gives me some position. For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something. Name them. First, my family will have no claim on me. No visits, no contact, no pretending we share blood. Done. Second, I want access to whatever records exist about shadow magic. I need to learn to control this power, and I won't do it blind. A longer pause. Those records are restricted. Dangerous. So am I, apparently. Another twitch at his mouth. Granted. Third. She hesitated. This was the condition that truly mattered, the one that would determine whether this arrangement was survivable. Third, you will never lie to me. If you decide I've become too dangerous, if you decide to execute me regardless, you'll tell me to my face before you do it. Corvain's expression shifted. For the first time, something almost like respect flickered in those silver eyes. You have my word, he said quietly. As Alpha and as King, no matter what happens, you will face truth from me, not deception. Mireia extended her hand. He took it. His skin was cold, colder than it should be, colder than any wolf's body should run. And for just a moment, as their palms pressed together, she felt something stir in the darkness inside her. A warning, or perhaps a promise. Then I accept your offer, Alpha King, she said. I'll be your weapon against the darkness, your queen without a crown, your wife, in name alone. Corvain's fingers tightened around hers. The wedding will be in 3 days, he said. Prepare yourself. He released her hand and walked away, disappearing through a side door without looking back. Mireia stood alone in the great hall, surrounded by dying torches and the echo of choices she couldn't take back. The shadows beneath her skin hummed in anticipation. News of the royal wedding spread through Greymarch like wildfire. Within hours, every tavern, every market square, every noble estate buzzed with the same impossible story. The Alpha King had rejected his fated mate in front of 1,000 witnesses. He'd severed the sacred bond with ceremonial oil, and then, inexplicably, he'd announced he would marry her anyway. Not as his Luna, not as his fated, as a political bride. The kingdom didn't know what to make of it. Neither did Mireia. The 3 days before the wedding passed in a blur of fittings, preparations, and carefully avoided conversations. Corvain had assigned her a suite in the east wing of the castle, far from his own chambers. Servants attended to her needs with nervous efficiency, their eyes always sliding away from her face as if looking directly at her might summon the shadows they'd all heard about. She didn't see the king during those 3 days. Not once. But she saw plenty of everyone else. On the morning of the wedding, Mireia stood before a mirror while seamstresses made final adjustments to her gown. It was silver this time, not white. White was for bonded mates. Silver was for political unions, for arrangements, for marriages that meant nothing. The door opened behind her. "Leave us," a cold voice commanded. The seamstresses fled without a word. Mireia didn't turn. She didn't need to. She recognized her father's voice the way a soldier recognized the whistle of an incoming arrow. "You shouldn't be here," she said calmly. "I made my conditions clear." Lord Malachar stepped into her line of sight, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. He'd aged in the 3 days since the rejection ceremony, or perhaps she was simply seeing him clearly for the first time. "Do you think a king's promise protects you?" His voice dripped with contempt. "You're still my blood, still my shame, still the monster who should have died with her mother." Mireia's fingers tightened on the fabric of her skirt, but her expression remained smooth. "The king's guard is stationed outside this room. One scream, and they'll be through that door. I'm not here to hurt you." Malachar smiled, and it was the cruelest expression she'd ever seen on a human face. "I'm here to warn you." "About what?" "About what happens when he discovers what you really are." Her father took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Your mother thought she could hide too. She thought her power made her special, protected, untouchable. But they always find out, Mireia. And when they do, they always burn us." "Mother didn't hide," Mireia said quietly. "She was gentle. She used her shadows to help people, to heal them. You're the one who reported her to the council." Something flickered in Malachar's eyes. Guilt, perhaps. Or simply annoyance at being reminded of his own betrayal. "I did what was necessary to protect this family's name." "You did what was necessary to protect yourself?" Mireia finally turned to face him directly. "You were terrified someone would discover that you'd married a shadow wielder, that your heirs might carry the curse. So you destroyed her, and you've been trying to destroy me ever since. You know nothing. I know Cressida brought that seer to the king. I know she's been whispering in royal ears since the mate bond was announced. And I know you allowed it because you'd rather see me dead than see me rise above you." Malachar's jaw clenched. For a moment, real hatred blazed in his eyes, not the cold contempt she was used to, actual, burning hatred. "You think this marriage changes anything?" he hissed. "You think being queen will save you? The blight that's spreading through this kingdom isn't natural, girl. It's shadowborn. And when the king realizes that, when he understands that your very existence feeds the darkness that's killing his people." The door burst open. Guards flooded in, hands on their weapons, responding to some alarm Mireia hadn't heard. Behind them, framed in the doorway like a figure carved from ice, stood Corvain. His silver eyes swept the room, taking in Malachar's position, Mireia's pale face, the tension crackling between them. "Lord Blackthorn," the king said softly, "you were informed that your presence was not welcome in my castle." Malachar straightened, smoothing his coat with exaggerated dignity. "I came to wish my daughter well on her wedding day. Surely a father has that right." "You surrendered your rights when you handed your wife to the executioner." Corvain stepped forward, and Malachar involuntarily stepped back. "You surrendered them again when you tried to do the same to your daughter. Leave now, and I'll allow you to keep your title. Remain one moment longer, and I'll strip you of everything." The threat hung in the air like a blade, Malachar's face contorted through rage, humiliation, and finally, calculation. Whatever he was weighing behind those cold eyes, he apparently decided it wasn't worth the cost. "This isn't over," he said, looking at Mireia. "It's never over." Then he walked past the guards, past the king, and disappeared into the corridor. The guards followed at Corvain's gesture, pulling the door shut behind them. Silence fell over the room. Mireia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. Corvain didn't respond immediately. He was studying her with that unsettling intensity, as if trying to read something written beneath her skin. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing I haven't heard before." Mireia turned back to the mirror, forcing her hands to steady. Threats, warnings, predictions of my inevitable doom. He mentioned the blight. It wasn't a question. Mireia's fingers paused on her sleeve. He did. What did he say about it? She met his eyes in the mirror, silver against the darkness that always seemed to lurk at the edges of her reflection now. He said it's shadow-born, that my existence feeds it. She tilted her head slightly. Is that true? For a long moment, Corvain said nothing. Then he crossed the room to stand behind her, his reflection looming over hers in the glass. I don't know, he admitted. The blight appeared 6 months ago, long before your power manifested publicly. But it is darkness-related. That much is certain. So there's a chance my father is right, that I'm making it worse simply by existing. There's a chance, Corvain agreed. There's also a chance that your power is the only thing capable of stopping it. The prophecy speaks of salvation as well as destruction. Mireia laughed softly, bitterly. I'm either the cure or the disease. How comforting. The ceremony begins in 1 hour. Corvain's voice was flat again, businesslike. I came to escort you personally. There have been concerns about your safety. Concerns? Your sister has been busy. Half the court believes you've bewitched me with shadow magic. The other half believes I've gone mad. A muscle ticked in his jaw. I want no accidents between here and the Great Hall. Mireia absorbed this information with a calm she didn't feel. So I'll walk to my wedding surrounded by guards, marry a man who's promised never to love me, and spend the rest of my life wondering whether I'm saving the kingdom or damning it. Yes, Corvain said simply. That's exactly what you'll do. She should have been angry, should have felt trapped, used, diminished. But looking at her reflection, at the shadows that curled in her eyes like dark fire, Mireia felt something else entirely. Power. For the first time in her life, she was not hiding. For the first time, she was not apologizing for existing. She was about to become queen of the most powerful kingdom in the realm, married to a man who needed her, whether he wanted to admit it or not. And the shadows inside her sang with anticipation. The wedding ceremony was nothing like the rejection. Where that event had been packed with wolves eager to witness humiliation, this was attended by a small, tense gathering of essential nobles. The great hall had been reconfigured, the altar draped in silver rather than white, the ceremonial elements stripped to the barest minimum required for a political union. Mireia walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away, no family to stand witness. Just her silver gown, and the shadows that whispered beneath her skin. Corvain waited at the altar in formal black, his expression carved from stone. But when she climbed the steps to stand before him, she caught something in his scent that hadn't been there during the rejection. Uncertainty. The high priest performed the ceremony with visible reluctance. Political marriages were rare. Political marriages to shadow wielders were unprecedented. Every word seemed to stick in his throat. Do you, Corvain, Alpha King of Greymarch, take this woman as your political bride, your queen in title, bound by alliance rather than fate? I do. And do you, Mireia of House Blackthorn, accept this union, knowing it carries no sacred bond, no claim of souls, and no promise beyond the political? Mireia looked at Corvain, at his cold silver eyes, his rigid posture, the invisible walls he'd built around himself. I do, she said clearly. Then by the authority vested in me, I declare this union sealed. You are bound by law and alliance. The woman is now Queen of Greymarch in title. No kiss, no claiming, no celebration. Just two people standing at an altar, promising nothing but mutual use. The small crowd applauded politely. Somewhere in the back, Mireia caught sight of Cressida's face, twisted with fury. Her sister hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected the king to actually go through with it after everything she'd done to prevent it. Corvain took Mireya's hand. His skin was cold, colder than it had been 3 days ago. The wrongness in his scent had grown stronger. "My queen," he said flatly, the title landing like a stone. "My king," she replied. They walked down the aisle together, the first steps of a marriage built on nothing but necessity. Behind them, the shadows in the corners of the great hall pulsed once, then went still. That night, Mireya stood alone on the balcony of her new chambers, the queen's chambers, vast and cold and empty. Corvain had escorted her here after the ceremony and left without a word. True to his promise, he would not share her space, would not pretend this was anything more than what it was. She should feel relieved, should feel grateful for the distance that kept her safe from prophecy and complication. Instead, she felt the shadows stirring. They moved differently now, more responsively, as if the wedding had awakened something, some connection she didn't understand. She could feel the darkness of the castle, the pockets of shadow in every corner, every corridor. She could feel the blight, too, far away but growing, a wrongness on the edge of her awareness like a wound that wouldn't heal, and she could feel him, Corvain, somewhere in his chambers on the opposite side of the castle. She could sense his presence like a cold spot in a warm room, impossible to ignore. The bond was severed. She knew that. She'd felt it shatter during the rejection. So why could she still feel him? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called. A servant appeared, her eyes downcast. "Your Majesty, a visitor requests an audience. She says it's urgent." "At this hour? Who is it?" The servant hesitated. "She says her name is Morwen. She claims to be your mother's sister." Mireya's blood ran cold. Her mother had never mentioned a sister. She'd never mentioned any family at all. Yet another secret buried with her ashes. "Send her in." The servant bowed and retreated. Moments later, an old woman entered the chamber. She was small, stooped, wrapped in a traveling cloak that had seen better decades. But her eyes, dark as midnight, sharp as glass, met Mireya's with unsettling familiarity. "So," the woman said, her voice like dried leaves rustling, "you've finally awakened. I wondered how long it would take." "Who are you?" "I told you. Your mother's twin sister. Your aunt." Morwen stepped closer, studying Mireya's face with an intensity that bordered on hunger. "And the person who's going to tell you what the king didn't." Mireya's shadows stirred uneasily. "What do you mean?" "I mean the blight, child. The darkness that's eating this kingdom alive." Morwen's eyes glittered. "It isn't random. It isn't natural. And it isn't something you can fight." "Why not?" The old woman smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Because you're not the cure, Mireya." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're the cage. Your mother bound something inside you before she died. Something ancient. Something that's been sleeping for 23 years. The shadows around Mireya writhed. "And now that you've awakened," Morwen continued, "it's waking too." Morwen was gone by morning. She'd vanished as mysteriously as she'd appeared, leaving behind only her words and a small leather journal filled with notes about shadow magic. Mireya had stayed awake until dawn, reading by candlelight, trying to understand what her aunt had revealed. "You're not the cure. You're the cage. Your mother bound something inside you. It's waking too." The journal offered fragments of explanation. Shadow wielders were not simply born with power. They were vessels. Their bloodline had been created centuries ago to contain something called the Voidborn, an entity of pure darkness that had nearly destroyed the world in ancient times. Each generation, the power passed from mother to daughter, keeping the Voidborn trapped. But Mireya's mother had died before teaching her anything, before explaining how to maintain the cage, before warning her what happened if the seals began to break. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Enter." A guard appeared. "Your Majesty." The king requests your presence in the northern courtyard. He says it's time to begin your training. Training. Right. She was supposed to learn to control her shadows so she could fight the blight. But now that she understood what the shadows truly were, what lived inside them, the prospect felt far more dangerous. Still, she had no choice. She'd made a bargain. Mireia followed the guard through winding corridors and down stone staircases until they emerged into a courtyard she hadn't seen before. It was enclosed by high walls, the ground covered in packed dirt rather than grass. Training dummies lined one side, weapon racks lined the other, and in the center, stripped down to a simple white shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, stood Corvan. Mireia's breath caught. She'd seen him in formal attire, in ceremonial robes, in the rigid armor of kingship. She'd never seen him like this, informal, almost vulnerable. His dark hair was tied back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his features. His forearms were corded with muscle, marked with faint scars she hadn't noticed before. He was also paler than he'd been at the wedding. The wrongness in his scent had deepened. "You're late," he said flatly. "I was reading." Mireia descended the steps into the courtyard. "My aunt left me a journal about shadow magic." Corvain's eyes sharpened. "Your aunt?" "Morwen. She appeared last night. Apparently she's my mother's twin sister." Mireia stopped a few feet from him, close enough to feel the cold radiating from his skin. "She told me some interesting things." "Such as?" Mireia considered lying, considered keeping Morwen's revelations to herself until she understood them better. But Corvain had promised her truth. She owed him the same. "She said the blight isn't something I can fight. She said I'm not the cure." Mireia met his silver eyes steadily. "She said I'm a cage, that my mother bound something inside me before she died, and now that my powers have awakened, it's waking too." Corvain's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tighten at his sides. "The Voidborn," he said quietly. "You know about it?" "I know the legends. An entity of pure darkness that nearly consumed the world 300 years ago. It was supposedly destroyed by a coalition of shadow wielders who sacrificed themselves to cage it forever." His jaw tightened. "Apparently, forever had conditions." "Apparently." Mireia looked down at her hands where faint tendrils of shadow curled around her fingers. "So when you asked me to fight the blight, you were essentially asking me to fight myself." "I didn't know." "But you suspected. The prophecy said I would either save you or destroy you. This is what it meant, isn't it? If I lose control of what's inside me, then you become the very thing you're meant to stop." Corvain stepped closer, and despite herself, Mireia held her ground, which is why training matters. Your mother controlled her power for decades. Whatever she bound inside you, she managed to keep it contained. You can learn to do the same. "My mother had training, teachers, a lifetime of practice." Mireia's voice cracked slightly. "I have a journal and 3 days of knowing this power exists. Then we start with fundamentals." He moved before she could react. One moment he was standing in front of her. The next, his hand was wrapped around her wrist, his body behind hers, his mouth close to her ear. "Call the shadows," he commanded. Mireia's heart hammered. She could feel him everywhere, the cold of his chest against her back, the strength of his grip, the brush of his breath against her neck. The mate bond was severed. She shouldn't feel anything. She felt everything. "I don't know how to call them deliberately," she managed. "They just come." "Then make them come." His voice was low, controlled. "Feel the darkness inside you. Don't fight it. Don't fear it. Just reach." Mireia closed her eyes. She tried to ignore the distraction of his body against hers, the cold that seeped through her dress, the way her wolf stirred restlessly despite the broken bond. She reached. The shadows responded. They rose from her skin slowly this time, not in explosive waves but in gentle tendrils. They wrapped around her arms, her shoulders, extending outward like dark wings unfurling for the first time. Good, Corvain breathed. Now shape them. Give them form. What form? Whatever feels natural. Mireia concentrated. The shadows shifted, thickened, solidified. When she opened her eyes, twin blades of pure darkness extended from her forearms, curved and gleaming and sharp as obsidian. Corvain released her wrist and stepped back, his expression unreadable. Weapons, he observed. Interesting first instinct. I've spent my whole life needing to defend myself, Mireia said quietly. I suppose that leaves a mark? Something flickered in his silver eyes, something that looked almost like recognition. Again, he said, different form this time. They trained for hours. Corvain pushed her relentlessly, demanding she shape the shadows into shields, into chains, into walls of impenetrable darkness. By the time the sun began to set, Mireia's entire body ached and her control was fraying at the edges. Enough, Corvain finally said. You've done well for a first session. Mireia let the shadows recede, sagging slightly with exhaustion. You sound surprised. I expected more resistance. Most wolves with newly awakened powers fight their nature. You've accepted yours? I spent 23 years being told my nature was a curse, a stain, something to be ashamed of. Mireia looked at him steadily. Maybe I'm just tired of hating myself. Corvain was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, brief. His fingers were ice against her cheek, but the gesture itself was anything but cold. You should rest, he said, his voice rougher than before. We'll continue tomorrow. He turned and walked away before she could respond, but Mireia stood frozen in the courtyard, her cheek still tingling where he'd touched her, her heart doing something she hadn't given it permission to do. This is dangerous, she thought. This is exactly what the prophecy warned against. The shadows inside her purred in agreement, or perhaps in anticipation. The training continued for weeks. Every morning, Mireia met Corvain in the northern courtyard. Every evening, she collapsed into bed with muscles screaming and shadows buzzing beneath her skin. And somewhere in between, something began to shift. It started with small things. The way Corvain's instructions became less clipped, more patient. The way he brought her water without being asked, pressing the cold flask into her hands when she was too exhausted to think straight. The way he stayed after sessions ended, not speaking, just present. Mireia told herself it meant nothing. Political alliance, mutual necessity, nothing more. But then came the night terrors. They began 3 weeks after the wedding, waking her in the small hours with visions of darkness and hunger, and something ancient pressing against the walls of her mind. She'd lie in bed afterward, shaking, feeling the void-born stir inside her like a beast testing the bars of its cage. She didn't tell anyone. What would she say? That the monster inside her was growing restless? That her cage was weakening? But Corvain knew anyway. You haven't been sleeping. They were in the courtyard, mid-session, when he said it. Mireia's hands faltered, and the shadow shield she'd been forming dissolved. I'm fine. You're not. Corvain stepped closer, his silver eyes scanning her face with that unsettling intensity. Your control has degraded. Your reflexes are slower, and there are shadows under your eyes that have nothing to do with magic. Maybe your training regimen is too brutal. Maybe you're lying to me about something important. Mireia's jaw tightened. You promised truth. You didn't promise I'd share every detail of my private life. Your private life affects your ability to cage the Voidborn. Corvain's voice was hard. If that cage breaks, everyone in this kingdom dies. So yes, I think I'm entitled to know when something is wrong. They stared at each other, tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Finally, Mireia looked away. Nightmares, she admitted quietly. I've been having nightmares. I see the Voidborn, or I think I do. Something vast and dark and hungry, pressing against the inside of my skull. Every night it feels closer, stronger. Corvain's expression shifted. The hardness faded, replaced by something she couldn't name. How long? 3 weeks, since the training started. She laughed bitterly. Perhaps learning to use my power was a mistake. Perhaps it gave the thing inside me permission to wake up. Or perhaps the Voidborn was already waking, and your training is the only thing keeping it contained. Mireia shook her head. You don't understand. It's not just nightmares. It's whispers. Sometimes, when I'm using my shadows, I hear a voice, promising things. Power, freedom, vengeance against everyone who ever hurt me. She expected horror, disgust, fear. Instead, Corvain reached out and took her hand. His grip was cold, but his touch was grounding. Real. Present. I hear whispers too, he said quietly. Mireia's breath caught. What? The cold inside me. It's not just a family condition, as I told you before. His jaw tightened. It's a curse, placed on my bloodline 300 years ago by a witch who wanted revenge for her daughter's death. Revenge for what? My ancestor rejected her daughter as his mate. Publicly. Cruelly. Corvain's mouth twisted. Sound familiar? The parallel wasn't lost on Mireia, an ancestor who rejected his mate. A curse that punished the rejection. And now, here they stood, 3 centuries later, repeating the same pattern. What does the curse do? It freezes us from the inside out. Slowly. Inevitably. Corvain released her hand, stepping back. Every king of my line has died before reaching 40. My father lasted until 38. His father made it to 35. Mireia's heart clenched. How old are you? 29. 9 years. At most, he had 9 years left. Probably less, given how cold he already ran, how pale his skin had become. That's why you rejected me, she realized. Not just the prophecy. You're dying anyway. You didn't want to drag a mate down with you. A mate bond ties 2 souls together. When one dies, the other often follows. Corvain's voice was flat, detached, as if he were discussing the weather rather than his own impending death. I couldn't condemn someone to that fate just because the universe decided we were matched. But you married me anyway. A political marriage carries no soul bond. When I die, you'll grieve or you won't. But you'll survive. Mireia stared at him. This cold, impossible man who had given her protection and titles and training, who had shielded her from her family and introduced her to a power she'd never known she possessed. This man who was dying, and who had structured his entire life around ensuring no one would die with him. The curse, she said slowly. Is there no way to break it? Generations of my family have tried. Healers, witches, scholars, none have succeeded. But shadow magic is older than most witch curses, perhaps. No. The word was sharp. Final. You will not risk yourself trying to save me. The kingdom needs you alive. The Voidborn must remain caged. My death is irrelevant compared to that. Irrelevant. Mireia stepped closer, ignoring the cold that radiated from him. You think your death is irrelevant? I think it's inevitable. There's a difference. And I think you've spent so long preparing to die that you've forgotten how to live. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither wanted to examine too closely. Corvain's silver eyes searched her face. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and cupped her cheek. His palm was ice, but his thumb, brushing across her cheekbone, was gentle. You should hate me, he said quietly. I rejected you, humiliated you, used you. You saved me, Mireia countered, from my father, from execution, from a life of hiding and shame. I saved a tool, a weapon. Is that all I am to you? The question came out before she could stop it, raw and honest and far more vulnerable than she'd intended. Corvain's hand trembled against her face. His eyes darkened with something that looked like pain. No, he admitted, the word barely audible. That's the problem. He dropped his hand and stepped back, his expression shuddering closed. Training is over for today, he said roughly. Rest, eat. Tomorrow we begin work on combating the blight directly. He was gone before she could respond, disappearing through the courtyard door with the practiced efficiency of a man running from something he couldn't fight. Mireia stood alone in the fading light, her heart racing, her mind spinning. That's the problem, he'd said. She was the problem. Or rather, his feelings for her were. Because somewhere in the weeks of training and small kindnesses and whispered confessions, the Alpha King who'd sworn never to care about her had started to do exactly that. And Mireia, despite every warning, despite every logical argument against it, had started to care about him too. That night, the nightmares were worse than ever. The Voidborn pressed against her consciousness like a living storm, showing her visions of devastation, the kingdom in flames, villages swallowed by darkness, Corvain frozen solid, and his silver eyes empty and dead. Let me out, the voice whispered. Let me out, and I can save him. Let me out, and I can save everyone. Let me out. Let me out. Mireia woke screaming, shadows exploding from her body in uncontrolled waves. Servants came running, guards pounded on her door. But she couldn't stop, couldn't breathe, and couldn't contain the darkness that poured from her like blood from a wound. Then cold hands gripped her shoulders. Mireia. Corvain's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Mireia, look at me. She forced her eyes open. He was there, in her chambers, in his night clothes, his dark hair loose around his shoulders. His skin was so pale it was almost translucent in the moonlight. I can't stop it, she gasped. It's too strong. You can. His grip tightened. You're stronger than it is. You're stronger than anything. Now breathe. Focus on my voice. Let everything else go. She tried. Gods, she tried. She focused on his eyes, his voice, and the impossible cold of his touch that somehow felt more real than anything else in the world. Slowly, painfully, the shadows receded. When the last tendril had disappeared beneath her skin, Mireia collapsed against him, trembling. Corvain caught her, his arms wrapping around her with a desperation that belied his usual control. I have you, he murmured against her hair. I have you. They stayed like that for a long time, queen and king, monster and dying man, holding each other in the darkness while their respective curses whispered hungrily at the edges of their minds. Neither spoke of what it meant. Neither needed to. After that night, everything changed. Corvain didn't return to his own chambers. He stayed, sitting vigil in a chair beside her bed, watching over her while she slept. The nightmares still came, but they were less intense now, less consuming, as if his presence alone pushed the Voidborn back. The servants noticed, the court noticed. Whispers spread through the castle like wildfire. The king never leaves her side now. He was in her chambers all night. Perhaps the political marriage has become something more. Mireia heard the whispers and ignored them. What did it matter what the court thought? The truth was far more complicated than rumor could capture. But the truth was also this. She was falling in love with him. Not the cold king who had rejected her. Not the political strategist who had offered her a loveless bargain. But the man who stayed awake so she could sleep. The man who touched her face like she was precious. The man who was dying, who had always been dying, and who had structured his entire existence around ensuring no one would mourn him when he was gone. She was falling in love with him, and it terrified her. because the prophecy still hung over them, because the Voidborn still whispered in her dreams, because every time she let herself care, the universe seemed to punish her for it. A month after the wedding, Corvain took her to see the Blight. They rode out from the castle at dawn, accompanied by a small guard of his most trusted soldiers. The landscape changed as they traveled north. Lush forests giving way to barren earth, vibrant streams turning murky and stagnant. And then they crested a hill and saw it. The Blight was a wall of darkness. Not shadow, not night. Something else entirely. It stretched across the valley like a living wound, pulsing and writhing, swallowing everything it touched. Trees stood frozen mid-rot, their bark blackened, their leaves turned to ash. Animals lay scattered across the ground, preserved in death like insects in amber. Gods, Mireia breathed. It's grown since last month, Corvain said quietly. 3 more villages are inside it now. We managed to evacuate most of the residents, but... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Can we go closer? Not safely. The few soldiers who've tried to enter have not returned. Mireia stared at the darkness, feeling it pulse in recognition. The Voidborn inside her stirred, reaching toward the Blight like a hand reaching toward its own reflection. Part of me, it whispered. Part of us. Let me out, and I can reclaim it, control it, make it serve. She pushed the voice down, focusing on the reality before her. It's connected to me, she said. I can feel it. Corvain's head turned sharply. What do you mean? The Blight, the Voidborn inside me. They're resonating, like 2 instruments playing the same note. Can you stop it? Pull it back? Mireia closed her eyes, reaching toward the darkness with her shadows. For a moment, she felt the Blight respond, felt it hesitate, recognize her authority, begin to contract. Then, something pushed back. The force hit her like a physical blow, sending her reeling in the saddle. Corvain caught her before she could fall, his cold hands gripping her arms. What happened? There's something inside the Blight, Mireia gasped. Something else. Someone is controlling it. Who? I don't... She froze. In the instant of contact, she'd felt something familiar. A signature she recognized from childhood nightmares, from whispered stories, from the day her mother burned. My father, she breathed. My father is feeding it. They returned to the castle at full gallop, guards struggling to keep pace. Corvain sent soldiers to arrest Lord Malachar immediately, but by the time they reached the Blackthorn estate, he was gone. Cressida remained. She was brought to the castle in chains, protesting her innocence with increasingly desperate conviction. But when Corvain's interrogators pressed her, the truth emerged in fragments. Their father had been experimenting with shadow magic for years, not wielding it himself. He didn't have the gift, but using artifacts, rituals, and forbidden techniques to siphon power from the Blight and channel it toward his own ends. He said it would make him powerful, Cressida sobbed. He said once the Blight consumed enough of the kingdom, he could bargain with the Voidborn directly. Trade his service for immortality. And you helped him, Mireia said flatly. I didn't know. Not at first. Cressida's eyes were wild, terrified. He said you were the danger, that your power would destroy everything. I believed him. I brought the seer to the king because father said it would protect the kingdom. The seer who delivered the prophecy about me? Yes. The prophecy that led to my public rejection? Yes. Cressida was crying now, ugly sobs that twisted her beautiful face. But I didn't know about the Blight. I swear I didn't know he was feeding it. I thought I was saving people, not killing them. Mireia looked at her sister, this woman who had tormented her for 23 years, who had smiled at her humiliation, who had worked tirelessly to destroy her, and felt nothing but exhaustion. Take her away, she said. The guards dragged Cressida from the room, her screams echoing down the corridor. Corvain waited until the door closed before speaking. Your father is still out there, still connected to the blight. I know. If he's truly made a bargain with the Voidborn, or thinks he has, he'll try to break your cage. Free the entity. Use it for his own purposes. I know. Corvain stepped closer, his silver eyes searching her face. Can you stop him? Mireia thought about everything she'd learned, about the shadows inside her, the power that was both weapon and prison, about the mother she'd lost and the monster she contained. Yes, she said quietly, but not alone. You won't be alone. Corvain's hand found hers, his cold fingers intertwining with her warm ones. Whatever comes, we face it together. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they made Mireia's heart clench with terror, because she'd felt the blight. She'd felt the Voidborn recognizing it, reaching for it, wanting to merge with it. And she'd felt how close she was to losing control. If she faced her father, if she confronted the blight directly, she might save the kingdom. Or she might become the very thing that destroyed it. That night, Mireia found Corvain in his study, staring at maps of the blight's spread. He didn't look up when she entered, but she saw his shoulders tense with awareness. You should be resting, he said. So should you. She closed the door behind her. But we're both here instead. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything neither had said. Finally, Mireia crossed the room to stand beside him. She looked at the maps, at the darkness consuming village after village, spreading inexorably toward the castle. We have maybe 2 weeks, Corvain said quietly. At current rate of expansion, the blight will reach the outer walls within 14 days. Then we stop it before then. How? I go into the blight. I find my father. I sever his connection to the darkness. Corvain's jaw tightened. That's suicide. It's the only option. Mireia turned to face him. You said it yourself. I'm the last shadow wielder. I'm the only one who can enter that darkness and survive, the only one who might be able to control it. Might, he repeated. You might be able to control it, or you might lose yourself entirely, become what your father wants you to become. That's a risk I have to take. No. The word came out raw, desperate. I won't allow it. You don't get to make that choice. I am your king. You are my political husband. Mireia's voice cracked. You made sure of that, remember? No bond, no claim, no right to stop me from doing what needs to be done. Corvain moved before she could react. His hands gripped her shoulders, his silver eyes blazing with an intensity she'd never seen before. Do you think I care about politics right now? He demanded. Do you think I care about bonds or claims or any of that? Then what do you care about? You. The word tore from him like a confession. I care about you. I have cared about you since the moment you smiled at your own rejection. Since you demanded conditions from a king when you had no power to negotiate. Since you reached into the darkness inside yourself and pulled out light. Mireia's heart stopped. Corvain, I know what the prophecy says. I know you could destroy me. I know caring about you is the most dangerous thing I've ever done. His hands trembled on her shoulders. But I can't stop. I've tried. Gods, I've tried. But every moment I spend with you makes it worse. Makes me want more. Makes me forget that I'm dying, that you're dangerous, that everything about this is impossible. You're not supposed to love me, Mireia whispered. That was the arrangement. I know. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. I broke my own rules. I'm sorry. She should push him away, should remind him of the prophecy, the curse, all the reasons this couldn't work. Instead, she said, I love you too. The words fell from her lips like prayers, like surrender. Corvain went rigid. Then his mouth found hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, tasting of cold and shadow and everything they'd both been denying. his hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers gripped his shirt. They crashed together like storms meeting, like darkness finding light. And then, Corvain screamed. He tore away from her, staggering backward, his hands clutching his chest. Frost was spreading across his skin, faster than she'd ever seen, racing up his arms, his neck, crystallizing across his face. "No," Mireia gasped. "No, no, no." "The curse," Corvain choked out. His silver eyes were wide with agony. When I admitted, when I said the words, understanding crashed over her. The curse that froze his bloodline. The curse placed by a witch whose daughter was rejected. It wasn't just about dying young. It was about love. The moment he confessed love, real love, true love, the curse activated. "I'm killing you," Mireia cried. "By loving you, I'm killing you." Corvain collapsed to his knees, the frost consuming him. His breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale a cloud of frozen vapor. "Worth it," he managed. "You're worth it." "Don't say that." She fell to her knees beside him, shadows erupting from her skin in frantic waves. "Don't you dare say that. I didn't survive my whole life just to lose you now." The Voidborn stirred inside her, sensing weakness, sensing opportunity. "Let me out," it whispered. "I can save him. I can burn the ice away. I can give you both everything you want. Just let me out." For one terrible moment, Mireia considered it. Then she looked at Corvain, at the man she loved, at the king who had chosen her when no one else would, and she made a different choice. "I'm not letting you go," she said, "and I'm not letting it out." She pressed her hands to his frozen chest and did the impossible. She pushed her shadows into him, not to attack, not to destroy, but to warm, to thaw, to wrap around the ice magic that was killing him and slowly, impossibly, melt it from the inside. The Voidborn screamed in rage, the shadows fought her control. But Mireia held on, pouring everything she had into the man she loved. "This is what my mother did," she realized distantly. "This is what shadow magic is for. Not destruction. Protection. Not caging darkness. Channeling light." The ice began to retreat. Corvain's breathing steadied. And somewhere deep inside Mireia, a seal that had been weakening for weeks, finally cracked wide open. The Voidborn poured into her consciousness like a flood. Finally, it roared, finally free. Mireia screamed, and the world went dark. Mireia opened her eyes to darkness, not the familiar darkness of her chambers or the comforting shadows she'd learned to wield. This was absolute void, endless, infinite, and hungry. She floated in nothing, surrounded by nothing, consumed by nothing. And she was not alone. "At last," the Voidborn said. "After 300 years, I am free." Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through her bones, her blood, her very soul. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. Vast beyond comprehension, ancient beyond memory, patient beyond madness. "Your mother thought she could cage me forever," the Voidborn continued. "She bound me with her dying breath, sealed me inside her infant daughter, and trusted that the seals would hold." "They did hold," Mireia said. Her voice sounded strange in this place, thin and small. "For 23 years. 23 years of sleeping, dreaming, waiting. Something shifted in the darkness, circling her like a predator. But you woke me. You used the shadows. You let love crack your defenses. And now here we are." "Here we are," Mireia agreed quietly. "So what happens now?" "Now I consume you. I wear your body like a skin. I finish what I started 3 centuries ago, the complete annihilation of this pitiful world and everyone in it." Mireia should have been terrified. Part of her was. But another part, the part that had smiled at her own rejection, that had demanded conditions from a king, that had loved a dying man despite every warning. That part was angry. "No," she said. The Voidborn laughed. It was a terrible sound, like mountains crumbling, like stars dying. "No? You think you can stop me? You are a vessel, child. A container. You have no power that isn't mine." "You're wrong." Mireia reached inside herself, searching for the shadows that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "The shadows don't belong to you. They belong to me. They've always belonged to me. The shadows are me. Every tendril, every whisper, every dark corner of your power. It flows from my essence. Without me, you are nothing." "Then let's test that theory." Mireia pulled. Not outward, the way she did when shaping weapons or shields. Inward. She pulled the shadows toward her center, gathering them, compressing them, claiming them as her own. The Voidborn screamed, "Stop! Stop! You cannot." "My mother gave her life to cage you," Mireia said through gritted teeth. "My grandmother wielded these shadows before her, and her mother before that. 300 years of women in my bloodline, all of them stronger than you." She pulled harder. The darkness around her began to shrink, collapsing inward, concentrating into a single point of absolute black. "I will destroy everything you love. I will burn your kingdom. I will freeze your king's heart until it shatters." "You'll try," Mireia agreed, "but you'll fail. Because you made one mistake." "What mistake?" "You waited too long?" Mireia smiled, and it was the same terrible smile she'd worn at her rejection. "You let me learn to love myself. And a woman who loves herself cannot be consumed by darkness." She pulled one final time. The void collapsed. Mireia gasped back to consciousness on the floor of Corvain's study. Her body ached everywhere. Her shadows writhed beneath her skin, agitated but contained. And the Voidborn, it was still there. She could feel it, diminished but not destroyed, pushed back into its cage but rattling the bars with furious determination. "This isn't over," it hissed. "You've only delayed the inevitable." "Then I'll delay it again tomorrow," Mireia muttered, "and the day after that." "Mireia." She turned her head. Corvain lay beside her, his skin still pale but no longer frozen. The frost had retreated from his face, his hands, and his chest. He was alive, weak, but alive. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. "I melted some ice." She tried to smile, hardly heroic. "You pushed your shadows into a curse that's killed every king in my bloodline for 3 centuries. You fought the Voidborn for control of your own mind." His hand found hers, cold fingers intertwining with warm. "That's the definition of heroic." Before Mireia could respond, the study doors burst open. Guards poured in, swords drawn, faces pale with terror. Behind them came the captain of the royal guard, his expression grim. "Your Majesties," he said, "we have a situation." Corvain struggled to sit up, and Mireia helped him, her arm around his shoulders. "Report." "The blight has accelerated. It's moving twice as fast as before, consuming everything in its path." The captain swallowed hard. "And there's something else. A man has appeared at the edge of the darkness. He says he wants to speak with the Queen." Mireia's blood ran cold. "My father." "Yes, Your Majesty. Lord Malachar Blackthorn. He says—" The captain hesitated. "He says if you don't come to him within the hour, he'll unleash the full power of the blight on the castle." They rode out despite Corvain's weakened state. He refused to let her go alone, refused to stay behind while she faced her father. The guards formed a protective circle around them, but everyone knew the truth. If Malachar controlled the blight as completely as he claimed, no number of soldiers would matter. The blight had grown since yesterday. It loomed before them now, a wall of absolute darkness stretching from horizon to horizon. And standing at its edge, perfectly calm, was Lord Malachar Blackthorn. He looked different. Power had changed him. His eyes were darker, his skin pale as bone, shadows curling around his fingers like living serpents. He smiled when he saw Mireia, and it was the cruelest expression she'd ever seen on a human face. "Daughter?" he said warmly. "How good of you to come. You wanted to speak." Mireia dismounted, walking toward him despite Corvain's protest. "Speak. I wanted to offer you a choice." Malachar spread his hands, indicating the blight behind him. "All of this could be yours. The Voidborn recognizes you as its true vessel. Join me, and together we can remake this kingdom. Tear down the old order. Build something better." "Better?" Mireia stared at him. "You've killed hundreds of people, destroyed villages, fed innocent lives to the darkness. Sacrifices. Necessary sacrifices for a greater purpose." Malachar's smile widened. "Your mother understood that. She could have been great, you know. She had the power. But she wasted it trying to contain the Voidborn rather than harnessing it. She saved me. She caged you. Turned you into a prison for power that should have been wielded freely." Malachar stepped closer, his shadow-wrapped hands reaching toward her. "But I can free you. I can break the seals she placed, give you access to the Voidborn's full strength. And what do you get in return? Partnership. Your power, channeled through my will. Together, we could conquer not just Greymarch, but every kingdom in the known world." Mireia looked at her father. This man who had hated her since birth, who had murdered her mother, who had twisted her sister into a weapon against her. This man who saw power as the only thing worth wanting and cruelty as the only way to obtain it. "No," she said simply. Malachar's expression flickered. "You refuse?" "I refuse." Mireia's shadows began to rise, curling around her arms like dark armor. "I refuse your offer. I refuse your partnership. And I refuse to let you hurt anyone else." "Then you choose death." Malachar's voice hardened. "Yours, and your precious king's." He thrust his hands toward her, and the blight responded. Darkness surged forward in a massive wave, hungry and absolute, ready to consume everything in its path. Mireia didn't flinch. She raised her own hands and met the blight with shadows. The collision was catastrophic. Power crashed against power, darkness against darkness, each trying to overwhelm the other. Mireia felt the Voidborn inside her surge toward the blight, wanting to merge, wanting to become whole again. "Let me out," it pleaded. "Let me join with my other half. We can destroy him together." "No." Mireia gritted her teeth, holding the creature back even as she fought her father's assault. "I don't need you to destroy him. I need me. You're not strong enough alone. Watch me." She pushed harder, channeling every ounce of will she possessed. The shadows obeyed her, not the Voidborn's essence but her own power, born from her bloodline, honed by her mother and grandmother and all the women who came before. And slowly, impossibly, the blight began to retreat. Malachar's eyes widened with disbelief. "How? How are you doing this?" "Because you were wrong about my mother." Mireia advanced, her shadows pushing his backward step by step. She didn't waste her power. She perfected it. She learned to wield darkness without being consumed by it, and she passed that gift to me. The Voidborn is caged, will always be caged. Mireia's voice rose with conviction. "Because I'm not its vessel. I'm its prison. And prisons don't break just because someone rattles the bars." She reached out and grabbed her father's wrist. Her shadows poured into him, severing his connection to the blight like cutting strings from a puppet. Malachar screamed as the stolen power was ripped away, as the darkness he'd bargained for abandoned him entirely. The blight shuddered, contracted, began to collapse inward on itself. "No," Malachar gasped. "No, this was supposed to be my triumph, my revenge, my—" "You're nothing." Mireia released him, letting him fall to his knees. You've spent your whole life chasing power because you couldn't stand being ordinary. Because you couldn't accept that your mother was a witch, that your wife was innocent, that your daughter was stronger than you'd ever be. She looked down at the broken man before her, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear of him, only pity. Take him, she said to the guards. He'll stand trial for his crimes, for the villages he destroyed, for the people he killed, for the wife he murdered. Malachar was dragged away, still screaming, still protesting, and still refusing to accept his own defeat. And behind Mireia, the blight continued to shrink, pulling back from villages and forests and fields, retreating into the nothing from which it had come. Corvain reached her side, his cold hand finding hers. It's over, he said quietly. Mireia shook her head. Not quite. She turned to face him, her shadows still writhing around her arms, the Voidborn still rattling its cage inside her mind. The curse on your bloodline, she said. The witch who cast it, she wanted revenge because her daughter was rejected. Yes, but the curse activates when the king admits love. Mireia stepped closer, her free hand rising to cup his cold cheek. What if that was never meant to be a punishment? What if it was meant to be a test? Corvain frowned. What do you mean? 300 years of kings who never loved, who never risked the curse activating, who chose cold, distant marriages and lonely deaths over the possibility of real connection. Mireia's thumb traced his cheekbone, just as he'd done to her so many times before. What if the curse was designed to break when someone loved you back, when someone chose to fight for you instead of letting you freeze? Mireia, you said the curse accelerates when you admit love, but it started to reverse when I pushed my shadows into you, when I chose to save you instead of protect myself. Her eyes met his, steady and certain. The witch didn't curse your line to die. She cursed them to be alone until someone loved them enough to break through the ice. Understanding dawned in Corvain's silver eyes. And you, I love you. Mireia said the words clearly, deliberately. I love you, Corvain. Not despite the curse, not despite the prophecy. I just love you. Fully and completely and without conditions. She pressed her shadows into him again, but this time it wasn't desperate or fearful. It was intentional, controlled. A deliberate gift of warmth flowing from her into him. The cold in his skin began to fade. Color returned to his cheeks. Warmth flooded his body. The curse that had gripped his bloodline for 3 centuries crumbled like ice in spring, melting away under the force of something it had never encountered before. Love that chose to fight. Corvain gasped, his eyes going wide with shock. I'm warm, he breathed. Mireia, I'm actually warm. She laughed, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she said. You are. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and this time there was no curse to punish them. No ice spreading across his skin. No whispered threats from the darkness. Just 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds, holding on as if they'd never let go. The kingdom of Greymarch celebrated for 7 days, not because the blight was gone, though it was. Not because Lord Malachar had been imprisoned, though he had. Locked in the deepest dungeon, stripped of title and lands, awaiting trial for crimes that would take months to catalog. Not even because the curse on the royal bloodline had been broken, though that news had spread through the kingdom like wildfire. They celebrated because their king was smiling. Corvain, who had never shown anything but cold control, who had been preparing for death since the day he was crowned, who had kept himself apart from everyone and everything, that Corvain was smiling, and it was because of her. Mireia stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, their chambers now, shared as they should have been from the beginning, watching the festivities in the courtyard below. Torches blazed against the night sky. Music rose from every corner. Wolves danced and laughed and howled with joy. "You're missing the celebration." She turned to find Corvain behind her, dressed simply in dark trousers and a loose white shirt. His hair was unbound, falling around his shoulders like black silk. And his skin, gods, his skin was warm. She would never get used to that. "I'm watching it," she said. "That counts. It counts more if you're dancing." "I don't dance." "Neither did I." He crossed the balcony to stand beside her, his arm wrapping around her waist. "Until you." Mireia leaned into him, feeling his warmth seep into her bones. The Voidborn was quiet tonight, pushed so far back into its cage that she could barely sense its presence. Her shadows curled contentedly beneath her skin, no longer a threat. Just a part of her. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now?" Corvain pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now we rule. Together. We rebuild the villages lost to the Blight. We establish the academy your mother should have had access to, where shadow wielders can learn to use their gifts safely. We make Greymarch a kingdom where no one has to hide what they are." "That sounds ambitious." "I have an ambitious queen." His arm tightened around her. "I also have a warm bed for the first time in my life, so I'm feeling optimistic." Mireia laughed, the sound surprising her. She hadn't laughed freely in... Had she ever laughed freely? Before Corvain, before the awakening, had there ever been a moment when she wasn't afraid? "There's something else," Corvain said. His voice had changed, growing softer, more serious. Mireia turned in his arms to face him. "What is it?" "The mate bond." He met her eyes, silver against shadow. "It was severed during the rejection ceremony. I know it can't be restored by normal means." "Corvain." "But we're not normal, are we?" He lifted his hand to her face, his warm palm cradling her cheek. "Your magic broke a curse that had held my family for 300 years. Your mother bound an ancient entity inside a newborn infant. Shadow wielders have abilities that defy conventional understanding." Mireia's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want the bond, the real bond, not a political arrangement, not a marriage of convenience." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I want your soul tied to mine. I want forever, Mireia. With you." Tears burned in her eyes. "But if we bond and something happens to one of us, then we face it together. Living or dying. Together." Corvain's voice was fierce with conviction. "I spent 29 years preparing to die alone. I don't want to live alone anymore." Mireia thought about everything that had brought them here, the rejection that had freed her, the curse that had shaped him, the prophecy that had warned she would either save him or destroy him. She had saved him, and in doing so, she had saved herself. "Yes," she whispered. Corvain's face transformed with joy. Real joy, unguarded and overwhelming and beautiful. "The ceremony has to be witnessed," he said, the words tumbling out. "We'll need the high priest, the court, the... We don't need any of that." Mireia reached for her shadows. They rose to her call, eager and responsive, wrapping around both of them like a cocoon of living darkness. "Shadow wielders bound souls long before priests existed," she said. "My mother taught herself from stolen moments and hidden books. I carry her knowledge in my blood." She pressed her hand over his heart. He pressed his over hers. "I claim you," she said, and the shadows pulsed with power. "As my mate, my soul, my forever." "I claim you," he echoed, his voice rough with emotion. "As my mate, my soul, my forever." The bond snapped into place. It was nothing like the forced connection of fated mates that had awakened in the market square. This was chosen, deliberate, intentional. Two souls reaching for each other and deciding to intertwine. Mireia felt him, not just his presence, but his essence, his warmth, his strength, his love. He was inside her now, as surely as the Voidborn was caged there, but infinitely more welcome. And she was inside him. The shadows receded, and they stood together on the balcony, bound in ways that transcended ceremony or law. "I love you," Corvain said. "I love you too," Mireia replied. Below them, the celebration continued. Above them, the stars blazed in a sky unmarred by darkness. And between them, the mate bond hummed with quiet, eternal certainty. Morwen appeared one final time, 3 months after the bonding ceremony. Mireia found her in the royal gardens, seated on a stone bench, looking older than she had during their first meeting. But her eyes were the same, sharp, knowing, infinitely deep. "Aunt," Mireia greeted her, "you've been avoiding my summons." "I've been watching." Morwen patted the bench beside her. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Mireia sat. The winter sun was warm on her face, and somewhere nearby, Corvain was meeting with his council. She could feel his contentment through the bond like a second heartbeat. "The Voidborn," Morwen said without preamble. "It's still inside you." "I know. It will always be inside you. The cage your mother built is strong, but not indestructible. You'll spend your entire life maintaining it." "I know that too." Morwen studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "Your mother would be proud," she said softly. "She always believed you'd be stronger than her. Stronger than all of us." Mirea's throat tightened. "I wish I could have known her. You carry her inside you. Every shadow you wield, every seal you maintain, that's her legacy, her gift to you." "And the Voidborn? Is that her gift too?" "No." Morwen's expression grew serious. "The Voidborn is a burden, a responsibility, a weight you'll carry until you pass it to your own daughter someday." Mirea's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. She wasn't showing yet, but she knew. Had known for weeks. "You've sensed it," Morwen observed. "A girl," Mireia confirmed, "due in the spring. She'll be strong, stronger than you even. The bloodline is purifying itself, generation by generation." Morwen rose from the bench, pulling her traveling cloak tighter. "I'll return when she's born. There are things I need to teach you both." "Where are you going?" "To prepare. The Voidborn isn't the only ancient power that sleeps in this world, child. Your daughter will need allies when the others begin to wake." Morwen began to walk away, then paused. "Tell the king congratulations. He's handled his new warmth better than I expected." Mireia laughed. "He still forgets he doesn't need 3 blankets at night." "Old habits." Morwen's eyes twinkled. "Though I suspect some habits are worth keeping." Then she was gone, disappearing between the garden hedges as mysteriously as she'd arrived. Mireia sat alone for a while, her hand on her stomach, feeling the tiny flutter of new life growing inside her. Another shadow wielder. Another cage for the Voidborn. Another link in a chain that stretched back 300 years and would stretch forward into eternity. But also, a daughter. A child born of love, not obligation. A life created by 2 people who had chosen each other against impossible odds. The shadows inside her hummed with something that felt almost like awareness. "Another cage," the Voidborn whispered. "Another vessel. Another generation of imprisonment." Mireia smiled. "Another generation of women stronger than you." The darkness fell silent. That evening, Mireia found Corvain in the great hall, the same hall where he'd rejected her, where she'd awakened her power, where their story had truly begun. He was alone, standing before the mating altar, his expression thoughtful. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, approaching him. "Having memories." He turned to face her, his silver eyes warm in a way they'd never been before. "This is where I lost you and found you." "You never lost me." Mireia took his hand. You just took the scenic route. The scenic route through public humiliation, near-death experiences, and ancient curses? Exactly. She grinned. Very scenic. Corvain laughed, the sound still new enough to surprise them both. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with familiar warmth. I have something for you, he said. Oh? He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a ring. Not the political marriage band she'd worn for months, but something else. A delicate silver circle set with a stone of pure black that seemed to swallow the light around it. Shadow opal, Corvain explained. The rarest gem in Greymarch. They say it can only be worn by someone who has faced their darkness and won. Mireia stared at the ring, tears pricking her eyes. Will you wear it? Corvain asked. As a symbol of our real bond? Our real marriage? Yes. The word came out thick with emotion. Yes, I'll wear it. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her, just as he had been waiting for her, all along. My queen, he murmured. My king, she replied. They kissed in the great hall where everything had begun, shadows curling around them like a blessing, the mate bond singing between their souls. Outside, the kingdom of Greymarch thrived. The blight was a memory. The curse was broken. Malachar sat in the deepest dungeon, awaiting a trial that would end with his execution. Cressida had been exiled to a distant territory, forbidden from ever returning. She'd wept at the sentencing, but Mireia felt nothing. Some bonds were too broken to repair. And on the throne sat a king who had learned to love, and a queen who had learned to stop hiding. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them had planned for it. They'd entered their arrangement seeking survival, not love. Safety, not happiness. But sometimes the universe has its own plans, and sometimes those plans are exactly what we needed all along. The rejection ceremony was supposed to destroy her. And as Mireia stood before the entire pack of Greymarch, the mate bond burning like poison in her chest, she knew what was coming. The Alpha King would speak the sacred words of severance. He would cut her loose before 1,000 witnesses. He would humiliate the bastard daughter of a disgraced bloodline and send her back to the shadows where she belonged. So the crowd waited for her to crumble. They waited for tears, for begging, for the pitiful collapse of a woman whose one chance at belonging had just been ripped away. But when Alpha King Corvain spoke the final word of rejection, something unexpected happened. Mireia smiled. Not a broken smile, not a mask of dignity. A real smile, wide and terrible and free. Because sometimes being rejected is the first step toward finding where you truly belong. And sometimes the person who rejects you becomes the one who can't live without you. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe for more tales of love, magic, and second chances. Drop a comment below telling me your favorite part. I read every single one, and your support means more than you know. Until next time.